The Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa says police misused their force during student protests. The organisation has released a report which focuses on violent fees-must-fall protests in both 2015 and 2016. Mary Rayner is the lead author and research consultant of the Double Harm report. She joins us together with Richard Mamabolo. He is from the Police and Prisons Civil Rights Union. It's great to have both of you. Thank you very, very much for coming into Morning Live. There has also, of course, on our side been numerous attempts to invite the South African Police Service to join in the conversation, but unfortunately those invitations were unsuccessful. Let me begin with you, Mary, because this is really about this report. Why did the Socio-Economic Rights Institute choose to focus particularly on this specific matter?
Thank you very much. The very strong interest came out of the organisation's involvement last year in representing some students who were arrested in the course of the protests. What they hadn't been able to do before was to examine the way in which the police operations were managed in the later part of last year. And the focus of this report is primarily on the later part of last year when the public order police were brought onto campus. And there were significant allegations of misuse of force and serious injuries caused. And this study was intended to focus very particularly on the contexts in which these injuries occurred, to try and understand how they happened, why they happened, and to make some assessment of where fault may lie.
All right. Richard, your response, obviously you've read this report and the study into it. What is your response?
Look, I think we've obviously been seeing a lot of protests in the country besides the ones that happen at Wits alone, and I think it's in our common interest to ensure that we find ways in which we can obviously limit the injuries that do occur within such protests. And of course, one of the things that you can basically, I would appreciate about their research was that they tried to obviously look into issues of contention, and of course based on that what can only be said is that there needs to be some form of discussion, public discussions, to ensure that obviously both partners have got or understand their rights basically when going for protests, because it's one thing for police to know exactly what they're supposed to do, as we know now that public order policing is being reviewed of obviously the manner in which they obviously relate with some of these protests, but the boundaries thereof as to what you can do in a protest, and obviously for the protesters as well, I think it's something that we need to focus on, because we have seen violent protests taking place, even, well, at Wits, of course, there were violent protests that were taking place, so we need to obviously ensure that there is dialogue between the two partners to ensure that in the future we have more peaceful protests.
Yeah. From this study, you talk about the extent of force that the police did use. Obviously, you know, what we see on television and what's actually happening, I mean, you can't have cameras everywhere catching this. So you spoke to people, you've obviously looked into it a lot more. What was explained to you in terms of, you know, the force that the police used, the injuries that were incurred, and if it was actually that necessary to get this aggressive?
Thanks. I think that there is a problem of public perception, because people obviously rely on different kinds of reports. And what we wanted to do was to get in deeper, to talk to people who were present, talk to people who were injured, look at the medical evidence, do some assessment of footage that in some situations were very, very powerfully done, and to come to a conclusion about whether or not in that particular situation force was used lawfully or not. I mean, the contention in the report is not in every single instance force was misused. We've examined a number of incidents in which the injuries were very troubling. The impact on the person injured is long-term. And where there's no proper public discussion about what really happened, it can in fact profoundly affect the person even more, because they feel what they went through is being denied. It never happened, or it's your fault. And the overall purpose also is to try and raise the issues, and we've approached the police leadership to consider the findings, and we've offered to engage with them.
Have they responded to you at all?
Not yet, but
Still not yet.
it's you know, there's time for a response back from them, and we would very much welcome an engagement, and including with people who are responsible for directing the particular operations of public order police, and there are some within them who are very keen to increase professionalism, to address the fact that there's insufficient numbers of them for the scale of the situation in the country.
Which may lead them to using the successive force, thinking that, well, you know, we don't have the numbers, so let's just get out there and perhaps do this with force. So I think, I mean, we can bring up many scenarios, and I mean, we can go back to Americana, which is a conversation in itself and a report in itself. But then, I mean, we go back to those images, and I've just got them playing in my head, those on the lawns of the Union buildings, and how the police reacted towards those protesters. Outside the streets at Wits, when suddenly the water cannons and the not live ammunition, but certainly rubber bullets were let out onto the students, and the injuries and the ambulances. And I mean, these were scenes that we were seeing playing out last year. Do you believe, Richard, that the police are trained adequately and aware of what to do in these situations?
You remember that since Marikana, there has been some investigations, and there were reports that came out after that, obviously looking into how then do we ensure that public order policing becomes more effective. But not only that, I think the fact that currently the public order policing is being reviewed does speak to the fact that there would be other means of looking into how they are trained and them understanding what their role should be. And I think, again, the good thing is that we should have dialogue. I think part of the research that you guys made has obviously suggested some of the options that are there. So I think it's mainly part of it should be a societal discussion that looks into how we then relate with police. And of course, I think at the end of when the review is done, we should obviously begin to have such dialogues that would ensure that both parties are comfortable in how the POP would obviously be reacting.
All right. Final word, Mary, we're already into news, but I don't think I can end this interview without a conclusion. What do you recommend? What do you think should be implemented to avoid circumstances going into the future, such as what we've already seen happening?
I think excellent command and control is really important, because some of what we saw was very erratic conduct, leaping straight to the highest level of force allowed, failing to negotiate and so forth, all of these principles that are actually there in their own regulations. So something goes wrong with command and control. There may be some kind of outside pressure, but it's not acceptable to go straight to the highest level of force when there's no threat being posed by the group they're opposite to. And it's very worrisome if there isn't proper review and accountability.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much to both of you. Richard Mamabolo, who's the spokesperson for Police and Prison Rights Union, that of course Civil Rights Union is POPCRU, and Mary Rayner is the research consultant for Socio-Economic Rights Institute. Thank you very, very much for your time talking to us about the violence that we saw unfolding in different universities around the country with the students protesting about fees, and that was both in 2015 and in 2016, and we'll continue to monitor that and hope we don't see that happening this year. Right, it is just gone 8 o'clock.